Bugging in and staying where you are is generally the better option over bugging out. It's where you have all your preps and where you have everything you need in order to survive whatever emergency has arrived. However, for some people, bugging out might be the only option, especially if you find yourself in an urban environment where staying where you are could be more dangerous than trying to leave. But trying to establish a bug out location sounds like a major feat. Most people think about purchasing large amounts of land out in the middle of nowhere, and that's a very expensive endeavor, which is why most people don't have a bug out location. So I figured we should talk about some overlooked, affordable bug out locations that you can easily access and generally afford if you try hard enough, and will give you an option to have some level of ownership of where you're heading during an SHTF scenario. Hey everybody, it's Magic Prepper. Today we're talking about overlooked, affordable bug out location options. Most people think of spending tons of money and having some homestead out in the middle of nowhere that they can retreat to during an emergency situation. However, that's just not obtainable for most people. It's very expensive and it requires having extra income in order to afford a place you aren't even at in the meantime. So I figured I would bring some overlooked options to your attention to give you some ideas about how you could establish a bug out location where you have some legal sense of ownership of that location, so when you go there, you know you can be there. Don't be one of the millions of people who end up at a state park or a national park where you have no claim and you're fighting for every single natural resource within said park. And if your bug out plan was to go to a national park before watching this video, then hit the subscribe button below, because honestly, I'm trying to steer you away from bad ideas. Now, the first section of bug out locations that are overlooked that you should definitely be looking into, if this is something you need, would be a commercial property. Commercial properties are overlooked because people just don't think about them, or they think you have to be starting a business or have some kind of professional career that requires the need of said location in order to get one. However, they're just rental properties, very much like your apartment or your home that you rent. You can go acquire them relatively easily, and they're generally inexpensive, especially if you're talking about renting a commercial property in a rural environment, which is what you should be looking for in the sense of a bug out location, right? You're not trying to rent somewhere in downtown Manhattan. You're trying to get out of the city and basically find a place that's much safer. And so when you're looking at commercial properties, check out warehouses for one. They're generally easy to secure. They usually don't have windows or anything that would make an easy point of entry, which means they can maintain a good level of OPSEC. They're very spacious, so you can store a lot of stuff there. A lot of them have running water and plumbing, and they're very cheap. I used to share a warehouse with 3 other people, and we only spent a total of $650 a month for a 1,600 square foot warehouse with running water and plumbing. So that just gives you an idea as to what you could probably get if you look for something like a warehouse, instead of thinking of a gigantic homestead with land and property and space. Think of somewhere secure that you can go to that's further away from an area you might be in that could be exceedingly dangerous during SHTF, and you start to find that there are a lot more options at your disposal than what you originally thought. Also in commercial property, look for offices. You can rent an office for relatively inexpensively, especially in a small town, and it usually is climate controlled. It also has running water and plumbing, like a bathroom, right? And at the same time, it's another place where you can store things, set up an AO of operations basically, and be able to have, I don't know, a comms station set up and all kinds of things put together at that location that's far away from the place you currently are. That gives you at least somewhere to be. And when you get places like warehouses or offices, you generally sign a lease, which gives you some legal sense of being allowed to be there, which is going to be a big deal during SHTF. Because if you think property owners or landlords aren't going to show up at their places and expect you to not be there if you're not supposed to be there, then you're being very naive about how that situation's probably going to look, okay? Another commercial property that people overlook and haven't really thought about would be like closed businesses. Keep in mind that businesses are generally owned by a landlord who has to find someone to operate them in order to turn a profit. And so that person has to lease the property, which then pays the landlord how they earn their income. And then that person's business is supposed to generate the income they need in order to pay the landlord. Well, if a business is closed and shut down, generally you have a landlord who's losing money every single day that somebody's not operating that business and has a lease signed with them. So look for businesses that are closed, because generally you can find yourself in a much cheaper lease. There's not necessarily a need to have the business up and running, but you can often just make somebody happy by paying rent. And you might find yourself in a situation like a business that I've seen for rent here in North Dakota, which is $400 a month and has a commercial restaurant and an apartment upstairs that is included in that $400 a month, as long as you pay the bill, right? There is generally not an agreement that says you are forced to open that business and run it in a commercial sense. So keep these things in mind as secondary options for bug out locations, especially when you think about something like what I just talked about, where you'd have access to an industrial kitchen or a commercial grade kitchen at least, and living quarters in the same building for $400 a month, which is less than most people's car payments are lately, right? These are things to consider. Obscure ideas are generally more affordable and less sought after, therefore you can find good situations that somebody else hasn't even thought about. And this is why I'm trying to bring this to your attention, because bugging out is a big deal, but you need to have somewhere to go. You can't just go frolicking in the woods and hope that Bambi's gonna come save you from whatever disaster you were running away from. You have to have a plan, and having a place to go, regardless of where it is a huge part of that plan. And having that legal backing of a lease that allows you to be at that location, that's huge, all right? Now, there are some other obscure ideas that you can get that are affordable that can give you somewhere to be, which I think are definitely worth looking at. And just keep in mind, this channel is supported by fleethecity.com. And fleethecity.com not only will help you find a homestead or a bug out location, especially in Idaho or Montana, but they also offer consulting services where they try to find the property that you're looking for, and they keep things in mind like food, energy, defensive tactics, and everything else related to what type of property you would be looking for in the sense of a bug out situation. So if you go to fleethecity.com, tell them Magic Prepper sent you, and they can help you find a bug out location. But I do understand that not everybody can afford a real estate situation, okay? So this is why we're also talking about these other options. Fleethecity.com might be able to help you find something affordable, but here's some other ideas that can also help you in that journey, all right? RV lots is another overlooked but affordable bug out location. I found RV lots where you can get a lot, which, you know, is yours, you have a lease, and yes, it's meant for an RV where you have water hookups and you have power hookups and everything else, but at the same time, that lot is still vacant unless you are there, which means there is a space for you whether or not you show up with an RV, right? Although an RV will probably make it a little bit more enjoyable, I'm just saying that you can establish having some level of ownership of this piece of land, piece of property that has access to power and things of that nature that could be very far away from where you are and at least gives you somewhere to go. And I found RV lots on the internet all the way from, $500 a month, which isn't super cheap, but if you buy annual leases, sometimes you can get them as cheap as $3,000 a year, which now you're at less than $300 a month. So when you start looking into these different ideas, you understand that they can become more and more affordable, and for less than a car payment, you could actually have a bug out location that gives you at least somewhere to go in the meantime, especially if you're just trying to get out of a major city and you rent some RV lot that's an hour away in the middle of nowhere. It's still a way better place to be than the chaos of SHTF in an urban environment, right? Okay, another thing to keep in mind would be like renting or leasing a parcel from a private landowner. Private farms and private landowners tend to have parcels for lease because people use them for grazing, they use them for horse stables, they use them for hunting. There's a lot of different reasons why farmers are willing to lease out different pieces of their land for whatever use you might need it for, of course, of which you have to agree upon. But in that situation, you might find yourself a nice piece of land in a nice part of the country for a very affordable rate that allows you to be there when you need to be there. And during an emergency situation, that farmer's not gonna take kindly to unwanted guests. But if you're somebody who has an established relationship with that farmer and you have a lease on a piece of their land, I'm sure that there's a good chance they'll let you be there because you have a right to be there. And that is what you're looking for. Bug out locations that give you some type of claim to the property you're heading to allow you to be there and to have previously established relationships already built. Okay, and I was going through some of my summer stuff here as we get ready to do some awesome, bug out style camping adventures and all that good stuff, right? But I'm going through some of my equipment and I was like, I got my tent, my sleeping bag, and some things put together, and I'm like, well, if I had to bug out, where would I go? And then again, if anyone has to bug out where they go, and it kind of is what spurred this video on. So I wanted to go ahead and mention that because you should be going through your stuff, making sure your gear is good to go, and testing it as much as you can in the environment that you're in. And although I am in the middle of North Dakota, it is nice to do these things in the summer when I can get good video and enjoy the weather for about 2 months or so. Now, moving on from there, another thing that you can look into, which could be very helpful, and this is something you might want to check out for yourself, but they have websites with land for sale. And I know we talk about how expensive land can be, but you can find land for very cheap. And I'll put some of those websites down in the description, as well as the fleethecity.com website, just so you guys have some options, right? I'm trying to give you as many options as I can to help you out. And some of these websites even offer things like owner financing for some of these properties, where you might be able to get land for 50 bucks down and 50 bucks a month for, I don't know, 8, 10 years, something like that. But either way, you might have land in your name at that point in time. And that's something better than nothing, isn't it? And some of these parcels of land that are for sale on some of these websites are literally like $2,500. And some of them allow owner financing, where you can find yourself a nice piece of property and not have to pay for it all up front. So there's a lot of options out there. I'll be completely honest with you, I have not used these services myself. So buyer beware, but I'm giving you at least some of the information that you can research for yourself to get ideas about what is out there, okay? Just to give you some options. These are what you need. And now the last thing I want to give you in the sense of advice towards finding a good bug out location is something that I talked about with a friend of mine here in North Dakota who gave me this advice, because believe it or not, sometimes when I make videos, I ask other people for their opinions or suggestions about some of these topics to try to get as much info as I can to give to you all. Well, my friend told me about the idea of tax forfeited properties, right? And so that's a little known thing that exists where if somebody doesn't pay their property taxes, they basically forfeit the property to the state. And then the state can sometimes sell the property off for just however much the tax is owed. So basically you pay the back taxes and now you own the property as well. And there are properties that have sold here in the state of North Dakota for like $150 all the way up to, $45,000, but you save a crap load of money on how much that property really should have cost. And so look up tax forfeited properties in your area, and you'll be surprised to how many there are and how easily they are to acquire, because a lot of people don't know they exist. And many of them go to auction and can be had for pennies on the dollar compared to how much land usually costs. So that could be another good option for you. And don't forget, with this bug out location, having some kind of building or something on the property is ideal, not necessarily required, but it would help. And just keep in mind that places like Home Depot literally sell like tiny homes now for 12 grand with financing, right? They have all kinds of stuff like that out there available to you and me if we need it. And honestly, I'll be looking into some of that stuff here in the future, because it's always a good idea to have a backup plan. And that's exactly what I'm trying to provide you with here on this channel, is not just ideas about what to do in the sense of preparedness, but also ideas about what to do when your preparedness doesn't work out the way you thought it would and you have to do something else, which is honestly probably how it's going to go down, right? So I wanted to mention this, bring this idea to you, and give you some overlooked bug out locations that are generally affordable that maybe you didn't think about. If you did think about them, or you have other options that I didn't speak about here in this video, leave it in the comments below so we can help each other out as much as we can. Try to build this community and give everybody as many options as they can receive, which means that gives them that many more opportunities to be better prepared. So hopefully this was helpful. If you have any other questions for me, magicprepper.com, and that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.